like to the pleasure of introducing Senator Kathleen Vinehout, and she is going to present today. She has great handouts for all of us. And we first and foremost want to say how much we appreciate you taking time out today to come and meet with all of us.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. I represent Western Wisconsin, and I'm also co-chair of the Audit Committee. And the Audit Committee has had a special project for almost 2 years, I think now, and that is to look into what's happening with family care. So what I'm going to talk about today is about family care, and I'm going to give you the handouts, but I have to talk for a little bit, and then we'll do the handouts. See, I know.
That's what you
have the handout now. I want you to read it, but not right now. It's the Christmas season, so Merry Christmas. And I am hearing from the tech industry that all across the country this is going to be the tech Christmas. So in the spirit of Christmas and in the spirit of technology, I'm going to ask you today for my Christmas present, which is going to be Family Care 2.0. So I'm suggesting let's reboot family care, keep what's good about it, and change what needs to be changed. And today, what I'd like to ask you to help me do, what I'd like to ask you to help me do is to envision Family Care 2.0. What does it look like? What is it? What parts of it can we see right there that need to be a part of Family Care 2.0? And Barb and I had a chance to talk a little bit, and one of the most important pieces that I can think of that I hear over and over again is that in this new world of Family Care 2.0, we have to have a fully functioning team with providers and consumers and their guardians at the table in the decisions that are made, that are now being made by sometimes just only the MCO. So help me envision what this looks like, and then we'll talk about how to get there. We have quality living arrangements that maximize people's independence, but also balance their independence with their need for services. That we have adequate services, we have well-paid providers, we have personal care workers that make more than minimum wage trying to scratch through with no health insurance. We have, as I mentioned, the providers, the fully functioning team of providers and MCOs at the table. We have adequate screening. We have a functional assessment that includes behavioral needs. We have a functional assessment that is standardized across the state, which is part of what I'd like to see. We have payments that are actually based on the needs of the clients that are accurately assessed through the functional screen. We have consistent payments that are not delayed, that are not knocked down after 30 days. We have a state Department of Health that is open to providers and advocates, and that adequately reimburses MCOs, because I come from the world of CHP, and there's a whole lot of lessons we can learn about what happened from the demise of CHP. We have an expansion of family care into the unserved areas. And I'm sure that you can help me add to the list. So, in this new world of Family Care 2.0, the reality is that we must operate in an era of budget restraint. We have a Medicaid budget that's growing faster than any other part of the state budget. We have a list of people coming into Badger Care that's growing, and we have a governor who doesn't want to create an exchange that could actually help take some of those people out of Badger Care and into the private market, but we won't go there with that problem. I've spent quite a bit of time listening to family care providers and guardians across the state. This morning I just got off the phone right before I came here with a former provider who is a CHP provider who's not going to go with the new provider, Southwest, in Eau Claire, and because of that we have some very upset constituents who are losing their replacement. I have been part of a discussion among providers that has given me some insight into what the problems are, and you can see by my envisioning of Family Care 2.0 what that means. I want to talk a little bit about some of the details, and then I want to give you a Ledge Council report that's not very long, it's only about 3 pages, but it summarizes the concerns that came out of the family care hearing that we had about a month and a half ago. So for quite some time, I've been hearing about duplication of services between the providers and the MCO. And a common complaint I have from family members is that is the use of an RN on the case. One family member recently in Black River Falls showed me her son's quote bill, and it's not really a bill, it's just an itemization of services with costing it out. And she said to me, can't we take that $78.50 that case management nurse is being paid and give that money to my son's personal care worker who just barely makes over $7 an hour? And I said, that's a really good idea. Maybe we can talk about how to do that. So I asked, what do I tell my friend Dorothy in Black River Falls who really wants to figure out how to pay the personal care workers? Because when you think about the problems with the MCO, and perhaps a change in the actuarial rate, the capitation rate for the MCO, when you think about the problems that providers face, all of this comes down to the family member, the consumer, and their own worker every day. This is where the rubber hits the road. Somehow, all of the problems that we see come down to what happens with that individual. The functional screen. We've heard forever about complaints related to the functional screen. There's evidence in the audit that clearly shows that part of the problem with CHP has to do with high-cost behavioral patients. Those high-cost behavioral patients were never clearly evaluated in the functional screen, and because of that, the providers were never adequately paid, and this started some of the problems that happened with CHP. Obviously, around the state, there are different clients with different needs, and sometimes the behavioral issues are a big factor, other times they're not, but in the Eau Claire area, they certainly were, partly because of the closing of Northern Center. There are some MCOs that are using a functional screen that involves behavioral issues, and maybe we can learn from some of those. Western Wisconsin Cares is an example of one of the MCOs that does. So in some cases the problem is resolved, in other cases the problem has not been resolved. Issues related to money. I'm sure you've experienced, or people that you know have experienced, many of the problems that I'm going to mention. Low payment of personal care workers is something I hear many, many stories of people who have called us up in our office. A lady from Osseo called me in tears. She was a personal care worker and she couldn't afford to fix her car on the salary that she was making, and she was worried that she was going to lose her job. The providers have told me how they've only been able to give personal care workers an increase of a quarter an hour over 4 years' time. And another woman told me about how she had applied for Badger Care. It was the only way, and I'm sure you hear this a lot. She had to apply for Badger Care. It was the only way that she could get health insurance. A dramatic drop in rates to providers. We saw this in Eau Claire with the beginning of the demise of CHP. CHP was writing contracts for only 30 days, and the drop from one 30-day period to another 30-day period was substantial. Another problem that we had was the problem of delayed payments. I had people who called me up and said, I can't continue to do this work if I'm not going to be able to get paid. I simply don't have the cash flow to be able to continue the home. And it's scary. And then finally, the whole question of the universal rate setting method. Is there something that needs to be done at the state level to have a more consistent rate setting methodology? This is something that we asked the department during the last audit committee hearing about whether or not they were interested in doing it. It was a recommendation that came out of the audit that was done a couple years ago. The answer clearly from the Department of Health was no. We're not going to do a universal rate setting methodology. This is something that we need to consider. And then to take it a step further, not the MCO setting the rate, but the state setting the actuarial rate or the capitation rate for the MCO, clearly there were problems with the capitation rate that was set for CHP. Different MCOs have different caseloads, and that, however that actuarial rate was set, and I've read through those reports, I think that it's something that we need to discuss. And then finally, it came out very clearly in the audit committee that we, from testimony from Lutheran Social Services, that we need to maximize federal dollars on the Money Follows the Person and the Community First Option program, and that these probably need, whatever we can do to help the Department of Health maximize federal dollars, this would help bring more dollars into the system. We talked about employment. We have evidence from the DHS report that was released in April of 2012 that it's that the IRS and Family Care and Partnership, the best we're looking at is 5% employment in an integrated setting. Social workers have told me it's very hard to find employment, especially in rural areas. I know many of you are involved in employment, and I certainly want your thoughts on what we can do to maximize placement at all levels of the continuum. And then finally, what role will IRIS play? There's some evidence in this DHS budget that DHS is interested in expanding IRIS. Those of you who are familiar with the program know that IRIS is more expensive by about $1,000 per member per month than Family Care. I asked DHS what their reasons were for expanding a program that's more costly than Family Care. It was quite unclear what they have in mind. And then those of us who are how shall I say this, who have lived through the voucher wars on the Education Committee, have been concerned that if we voucherize a service like Family Care or if Family Care morphs into IRIS, then it's much easier to cut the cost by simply cutting what that amount is in that voucher. Sort of the long-term health of caring for our most vulnerable. And then lastly, I wanted to open up the idea of moving into the underserved, or into the unserved areas. Effects of the CAP, the waiting list, and the expansion of Family Care into the unserved areas, which again is not in the DHS budget. It's something that if it was going to happen, would have to happen through the Joint Finance Committee. So I have with me a document that was prepared by our Legislative Council. This document is a summary of the suggestions that came out of the Audit Committee hearing on Family Care that happened in mid-October. I would look at this as a working document, a draft, for components that could be part of a bill that could be introduced either as a budget amendment or as a standalone bill, and there may be value in doing both. Many of these issues that I just mentioned are in this document. I talked about it in a little bit different way than the lawyer did that wrote the document. My challenge to you, both today and moving forward, is to help me envision Family Care 2.0. What does it look like? What kinds of things need to be changed, and what priorities do we want to put on what those changes are? I will introduce a bill. I would like it to become an audit committee bill. I would like to introduce it as an audit committee bill. The chances of it passing would be much greater. There are certain things that are clearly budget issues that probably couldn't become part of that bill, but I would like to open up the discussion about what needs to be a part of that bill. We've got an opportunity. The Audit Committee is very focused on this issue right now. And the Audit Committee can introduce the bill and have a hearing in the Audit Committee and move it forward as an agreed bill to the floor. It's a different approach than what we've done in the past. But I'd like to listen to what concerns you have and maybe what vision you have of what Family Care 2.0 is going to look like, and have your input in helping me deliver that Christmas present to all those people we care about. Thank you.